John Wilson has had an incredible career, raised a wonderful family, attended Harvard, where he achieved an MBA, and then he hit a speed bump. Seems like the prosecutors did not like the fact that he donated $100,000 to USC to aid his son, presumably, to gain admission. But that doesn't quite tell the whole story, does it, John?
No, not by even a small amount.
You may have thought I was a shill for Netflix the way I led us in on this segment. But tell us your story. You have a very talented, gifted, smart, athletic son who applied to USC and USC, right?
Yes,
You
correct.
you have two daughters as well, and
Yes,
th-
twin daughters that were also just juniors in high school when this happened.
yes, so they weren't caught up in the Varsity Blues scandal. John's already also written a book called Varsity Blues: Scandal Within a Scandal, and that's what we're here to talk about this morning. So you were encouraged to make this donation by the school, were you not? If I read it correctly.
Yes, absolutely. So just to step back, this scandal involved a number of other parents, all pretty much from California, who were cheating on tests, who were bribing coaches, and who were creating fake profiles for their children. And there were dozens of parents who pled guilty to doing those things. We didn't do any of those things. I was really wrapped up in this because I lived in Massachusetts. Of the 3,000 clients that the confessed comment at the center of the scandal had, only one lived in Massachusetts. And the Boston-based prosecutors first uncovered this from a random tip from somebody in Connecticut, unrelated to this case. And so once they started pulling on that thread, they found Felicity Huffman, Lori Loughlin, and other famous people that could actually create a lot of media attention. And for many prosecutors, a high profile case like this can really help make their careers. They wanted this case in Boston. But of the 3,000 clients involved in this case, only one lived in Massachusetts. So to create that venue hook, they needed to charge me. So despite the mountain of evidence that we didn't do any of the wrongdoings here, they charged me. And then they railroaded me through a crazy process. And our son was a highly qualified athlete. He had a world record when he was swimming when he was younger. He competed nationally and internationally in swimming and water polo for a decade. He joined the USC team. And we made a donation. We actually verified. We didn't just trust this con man at the center, Rick Singer, blindly. We did our due diligence, as parents, good parents would. We went to the school with our son, my wife and I. We met with the head coach. We talked through my son's credentials, and he played on the Stanford club team for 7 years, for example. He won the national championship 1 year with the Stanford club team as a starter. And so he was a real D1 athlete. We also verified with the development office at USC. We met with a separate development person and said, is donating through Singer's organization fine? They said, yes. We've done it many times in the past. And they said it would give your son a tiebreaker boost in admissions. And then we got a receipt from USC. We gave them the money through Singer's organization. They gave us a receipt on official letterhead, and they kept our money to this day. And I was shocked at our trial years later. They said, no, we never give a boost to admissions. That's illegal. That's improper. That's a bribe. And we were shocked. How could it be that you give receipts for bribes? How could USC be giving bribe receipts to parents? And so it's just been an astounding experience that's been horrific and a 7 year nightmare for my entire family.
Well, that's quite some story. Let me back up a little bit and unpack some of this. You said that was a random tip in Connecticut. What was that about, and how did that?
I don't know the details, but there was somebody else who was arrested in Connecticut for some unrelated crime. He knew about a coach at Yale who was taking bribes for children. And so he said, as part of his plea deal, if I give you this other random, criminal activity, can it help mitigate my sentencing? So the Boston-based prosecutors started this case with that random tip. That tip led to somebody in California, Rick Singer, who was the center of this scandal on the West Coast. And that's when the Boston prosecutors uncovered that many of Rick Singer's 3,000 clients included famous people, including
Yes.
people like Steve Jobs and Felicity Huffman. So that's how it started, an unrelated case.
So, why were the prosecutors so intent on having a forum in Boston? What was their motivation for that?
To boost their own careers. That's how a lot of prosecutors can go from $100,000, $150,000 a year job in the government to getting a partner job at a national law firm. So that national attention, once they knew there would be celebrities in this case, they knew there would be media attention. And those kinds of high profile cases can really catapult a prosecutor's careers. And what happened is the two prosecutors in my case left before the trial even happened and got very high paying jobs at high profile firms. So it can be a great launching pad for a prosecutor.
And so if they trash other people's lives in the process and their well built reputations, just collateral damage, ho hum, but they get the partnership at a law firm. So I guess it's all worth it.
Yeah, as despicable as that sounds, I do believe there was part of that motivation in this case was just that. And we were treated as collateral damage. And we know that they knew about our evidence. One of the things that happened in our trial, which is shocking, is they blocked our evidence 660 times during my trial, piece by piece. So we know they had it. For example, my daughters were involved in this actually as well. They were 16. They had a perfect score to near perfect score in the ACT. That was blocked by the judge and the prosecutors. My son's certified swim time proves one of the fastest in the country was blocked. They blocked 100 examples at USC, giving donor families a boost. They said, we never did this. We had 100 examples of them doing it. That was all blocked. And so the kind of trial we had was just so outrageous. It all got overturned unanimously by the appeals court, but we had to go through that process, except for a minor tax charge.
And how much did all that cost you?
It cost over $11 million.
Oh my gosh, that makes me.
It's been 6.5 years.
I was ill listening to your story. Now I'm like, got to go to the emergency room. That is seriously demonic. That prosecutors, and evidently a very biased judge. It sounds like. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if your son was qualified to get into USC based on his grades, his ACTs, and his athleticism, then it's hard to make a case that you bribe somebody. I mean, how can you bribe someone to do something that they were already going to do? I don't get it. And when you were encouraged by the school itself to make a donation, I sat on the board of trustees of my alma mater, and we encouraged parents to give money overtly and unrelentingly to the school. I guess what taints this is it was before your son was actually a student there, and so that it looks fishy. But tell me about this Rick Singer guy. Who was he, and what role did he play?
Yeah, Rick Singer was a college consultant who ran the biggest consulting firm on the West Coast. We were introduced to Rick Singer by Goldman Sachs. I had an advisor at Goldman Sachs who worked with me for 10 years, who we trusted. He had given us recommendations many times in the past for professional services. He called me out of the blue when my son was just entering high school as a freshman. He said, now your son's entering high school. We have another advisor here that we've worked with in the past who we recommend highly. And he introduced me to Rick Singer. And for 8 years, Rick Singer did legitimate services. He had a real business. He had 3,000 clients. Only 1% were ever charged. They had what they called wholesome accounts and dark side accounts. And 99% of his accounts were never charged. They were wholesome like we were. And so he ran legitimate businesses. He did real college tutoring, his company that helped my children practice for their ACTs. He did real advisory work saying what schools would be a good fit. He came up with like 10 schools that would be a good fit for our son. We visited those schools. And he had charity work. He had real charity. I would drive my son from San Francisco, where we lived, to Sacramento on weekends to help tutor inner city kids. So he performed legitimate services for us like he did for 99% of his accounts. 1% were dark side accounts who were cheating on tests and bribing. And those, I don't blame people for being outraged at that. If my children got bumped by someone who cheated on a test or someone who bribed a coach, I would be furious as well. We didn't do that.
Yeah. What kind of toll did it have on you and your family?
It's been devastating.
Besides the $11 million.
That's my entire life savings, by the way. I didn't take this lightly. I grew up poor, just so you understand my background. I grew up in a single family, single mom, in the projects of Hartford, Connecticut, right? We were literally living on welfare. I picked tobacco from the ages of 12 to 16 to help my family scrape by. So I didn't grow up with a silver spoon. I know the value of a dollar. Education changed my life, allowed me to have a successful career, and I spent every last penny I've ever saved fighting this case because the truth matters and defending my family honor matters. But it's been a 7-year nightmare. I can tell you there's nothing more devastating as a father to see your children suffering every day for 7 years not at the hands of a schoolyard bully who was picking on them and making fun of them, but at the hands of federal prosecutors who are knowingly spreading false statements about our children. They said, for example, my son to the press was an alleged athlete. They knew he had a world record. They knew he played for 7 years at Stanford club team. They knew he played on the USC team. They knew his high school coach recommended him. He was invited twice to the U.S. Olympic team development program. They knew all of this because they blocked it piece by piece.
And the
And
judge
they
would
told the
not
media he
allow
was
it
an
in.
alleged athlete.
And the judge wouldn't allow it in.
No, what happened is they also judge shopped up front. So they judge shopped up front. And they got a very supportive judge who's the oldest judge in America today, a federal judge. And so I'm sure he's a nice gentleman, but he basically was
Doesn't sound like it
essentially,
to me. What's his name?
he was a rubber stamp. I don't want to share his name, but he was a
Well, it's
rubber
public,
stamp to this
it's
process.
public record.
His name was Judge Gordon, and he was basically
No relation.
approving.
No relation.
Yes, Gordon with a T, from the Gordon fish food, seafood family.
Uh-huh.
But he basically, during my trial, approved the prosecutor's motions 98.3% of the time. He only let in 1.7% of our motions and our evidence. Think about that. So my daughter's perfect ACT test scores and near perfect scores were not allowed into my own trial about college admissions, right? So he blocked these things again and again 660 times during my trial. My attorneys, some of the best in the world, were flabbergasted. They'd never seen something like this, where all of our evidence was excluded. And to make it even worse, he allowed in evidence of other parents' bad acts that was also overturned. So they had 30 parents who confessed. And so you can imagine, you hear as a jury, I don't blame the jury for the decision of convicting us at first, 30 parents confessing to bribing and cheating and bribing and cheating. And then they had a setup call with me where Singer says, are you okay with the FBI? Are you okay if we give a check to the coach? I say, yes. But it was a check made out to the school. They don't share that detail. It wasn't a check made out to the coach's personal bank account, but you hear 30 other parents saying we're going to bribe, and then you hear my phone call saying, are you okay if we give a check to the coach? It sounds like a bribe. It wasn't. It was money that went to the school that we give to the coach. You have to give the check to somebody. You don't just throw it in the pool. You give it to somebody.
So
It's
he
a
was
check made out to
merely
the school.
he was merely the Pony Express. You gave him the check and he handed it over to the school.
And the school gave me a receipt for it. Exactly. I was actually working and living overseas at the time with my family. So Singer was in California. I was living in Europe working for my job. And so someone had to do this stuff. And we said, okay, fine. Give a check to the coach.
This is
That
just
kind
so
of thing.
disheartening to me. You know, I don't know whether this country has always been that way. I am a member of the Georgia Bar. I have been since 1978. I've always felt that the courts were where you could go to get refuge and to get justice. And then I hear Judge Roberts defending these leftist judges that are making decisions that are not based on the law and are instead based on their own bias. And he's saying that it is destructive to criticize the judges or to try and do anything to hold them accountable. What the hell is going on in this country?
It is frightening. I do think that by and large, most people working in the government are probably honest, hardworking people.
I
but
say
there
that
can be
on
bad
this show
apples.
every Saturday, that it's not an indictment on everybody that works in government, but it's just like, I've worked in a large law firm. I worked for a Fortune 500 company. I ran my own business. In every organization I've worked in, there have been bad apples.
Right.
It's not exclusive to any one profession. Not all cops are bad. The vast majority of cops risk their lives to defend our safety and protect our rights. It's the bad apples that get all the attention.
Right. And what happens in our system, if a prosecutor who has very significant resources and power can handpick a judge through a judge shopping process, the checks and balances go away.
Sure.
And that's when a bad apple can become almost an absolute power. And you know the old saying about absolute power corrupting.
Yeah.
And so that's the combination I think we have to guard against, is when a bad apple can pick a judge or a venue and then go after somebody for either political or personal or career reasons. You really have a process that can run off the rails.
So, have you made any effort to file complaints with the bar against these prosecutors who, it sounds to me, violated their professional responsibility to disclose and allow into evidence exculpatory information and testimony or evidence, is what I was trying to say.
There were many violations here that we can go through in terms of Brady materials and other things. You know, as you mentioned earlier, you know, this is the first time in history that supposedly the victim of a bribe, the schools in this case, were the ones who got the money.
Well, why don't you
It
turn
just
the
doesn't make
tables
sense.
on these prosecutors and file bar complaints? Maybe you can sue them civilly for failing to disclose exculpatory evidence and see if you can't take their bar license away. That's what I would like to see you do.
Yeah, well, again, we've been depleted financially and emotionally, so we've got to be careful where we pick our battles and
I
fights right
understand. That's
now.
the problem. And they know that, and they know that that's what enables them to act the way that they do. Somehow, this country has got to come to grips with abuses of authority. I don't know that there's anything that gets my blood boiling quicker than when people abuse the trust that the people have put in them and turn their power against innocent people, which I'm sorry, based on what I've read and the relative small amount, admittedly, of due diligence that I've done, it certainly smells to high heaven in terms of what they did to you. And then Netflix didn't make it any better, did they? They made a
No, they
movie
compounded
and
the issue, right?
and kind of
Just
featured you in the movie, if I understand it correctly, or highlighted you and your family. What possessed them to do that? I mean, there were certainly people that were flagrantly guilty of doing what you were charged with. Why pick on you when you had a more than a viable defense?
Yeah, I'll jump into that in a minute, John. The two other things that are important, I think, for some of your audience to understand is the government was behaving outrageously at many steps in this process. Right up front, they put me in a federal prison, literally in a prison, to intimidate me, and you know it was shocking. I was never arrested before or charged anything in my life. The two FBI agents who arrested me handcuffed me at an airport coming to a client meeting in Texas. Told me I was under arrest for honest services fraud. I said, "What is that?" I was shocked at their answer. They said, "We don't know. We've never heard of it before." That's what the FBI agents arrested me said. "We don't even know what this charge is. We've never heard of it before." Then they handed me off to a prison facility. I was stripped down, shackled, you know, handcuffed, hosed down in a common shower room with a couple of power hoses like an animal, given a jumpsuit and put into a cell block. The prison I was in had 850 inmates. The cell block had 60 inmates. And the guard warns me before I go in. He says, "Watch your back in there as you're an older white man. They're going to assume you're a pedophile. They hate pedophiles in this block, and someone will try to stab you with a shiv."
I'm
This is
so
how it
sorry.
started day one.
I
I
am
was
so
terrified.
sorry.
And I had no
That
idea why I was even under arrest, right? Then they went from there. They piled on 9 felony charges over the following year with 180 years of prison time to try to intimidate me to get me to plead guilty. Think about that. I made a donation. My kids were qualified. I got a tiebreaker boost. That was my crime. And they charged me with 180 years of prison time. That's almost as much as Bernie Madoff and more than Sam Bankman-Fried for making a donation, right? This is how crazy things got and how extreme.
Well, it just makes me wonder. You know, I have no use for people that mistreat women. Any sort of unwanted or uninvited overture towards a woman, particularly if it involves a touching or some indecent act, should be condemned, and there should be penalties. But I do wonder how many people were caught up in the Me Too movement who had done nothing, and it cost them their careers, their reputation, and you just know that there are people that fall into that category. It sounds almost like you are the victim of a similar mob to justice, because the Varsity Blues tragedy did outrage so many people. And
Right.
it was almost like, well, let's just find anybody that we can pin this on, and we'll write it to our silk stocking law firm career. It's just
Yeah, they used me for the
nauseating.
hook. They used me as a hook to bring in all the trials to Boston. But Netflix compounded the problem. Netflix came out with a documentary, they called it. It wasn't a documentary, which came out before my trial even happened, and they polluted our jury pool. So in their documentary, which they pre-announced, they had, I think, 9 or 10 other families who had confessed, who admitted that they were involved in cheating and bribing and so forth, and they added me to the mix. And they knew that I didn't plead guilty, that I was fighting this. And my lawyers gave them a 550-page warning letter before the movie came out with all these exculpatory facts in my case that were in the public record. I also voluntarily took 2 days of polygraph tests with the head of the FBI polygraph program and the head of the CIA, both former heads of the CIA polygraph program worldwide. I passed them all with flying colors. They had all of that evidence, right? Including the polygraph test results. Netflix didn't change a thing in their movie. I think they used me for several reasons, but I had more phone calls with Singer than anyone else. They could take sound bites of mine out of context and show them. So the Netflix movie had me 25 times in the movie making innocent sound bites, but when you juxtapose them or put them adjacent to another parent bribing, and I say I'm okay giving a check to the coach, or another parent, confessing to this kind of crime or that kind of crime on the recorded calls, and I say, where do I wire the money? It makes it sound bad when you put it out of context. So they used my sound bites 25 times in the movie's first 23 minutes to make me look like the worst parent of any. But none of those sound bites standalone said anything that was all guilty. And they smeared me in the public opinion, and they poisoned the jury pool. And even one of my jurors had seen this movie, and the judge wouldn't let us disqualify that juror, even though they'd seen this movie, which painted me out to be the worst villain of anyone in the entire film. So we have a lawsuit against Netflix now, and we've actually won the first major battle in Massachusetts court, which was a motion to dismiss. We prevailed, and now we're in discovery, and they're dragging it out. It's going to be another 2 years of discovery. That's the way they fight these things.
Yeah, and more legal bills will run up. But if you do get a verdict in your favor, you stand to get that claw that $11 million back.
Yeah, it's been much worse than that. The $11 million was hard money out the door, but I've also lost all my jobs, all my board roles, right? So I've been unemployed at the peak of my career for 7 years. So think about the compounding this has and the reputational impact on me and my children. So it's been devastating financially, emotionally, physically, and I feel most strongly about my children. They were innocent. They were highly qualified, and yet they're being ridiculed by the media and the social media trolls. My daughters had a perfect score, near perfect score, and that the social media said they were so stupid they couldn't get a job at McDonald's. That's why I bribed. They couldn't add. They couldn't make change, they said. My daughter had a perfect score, and the media says they couldn't get a job at McDonald's because they can't add. How do you think that affects a 16-year-old girl?
You haven't talked anything about your wife. Are you married?
Yes, I am married, and to the love of my wife, to the love of my life, Leslie. She's been a fantastic support. She helped me write this book. The hardest thing as a dad is to see your children suffer, but a very close second is to watch my wife cry herself to sleep almost every night as she worries about our children's futures.
So where are your children now, and how are they doing?
They've been in and out of college. They've had some very severe trauma as a result of this. My son graduated. He finished his degree, and so he's working in Southern California. My twin girls are still, I think, dealing with some of the trauma from this. They're now 22. And it's been extremely difficult, and I can't tell you how painful it is to see your children suffer, not for anything they did at all, but because a prosecutor wanted to use them as a pawn in this big chess match that they were playing, and treated them as collateral damage.
So did your daughters attend college and
Yes, they attended college, and they've taken some time off in between to finish. So they've been traumatized by this.
Yeah.
They were really, they were only 16 when it happened. Remember, this is, almost 7 years ago, 6.5 years ago. So it was just devastating for them to be working hard, studying hard, highly qualified, and yet be ridiculed by the prosecutors and the media as being unqualified.
Have their friends stuck with them?
Yeah, so the friends have stuck with us. The good news is the friends and family we've had has really helped us. So we've leaned into our faith, we've leaned into our family and our friends, and that's been great. But it's the circle of people around those friends that don't know you that have really been the most difficult part, the social media and the trolls. And so your immediate friend group they knew the truth. Our friends knew my children were highly qualified. They knew my son had a world record. He was on the Oprah TV show for a world record when he was younger. And yet to have him called an alleged athlete by the prosecutors, they knew that was fake, but only our close circle of friends knew that it was fake, that it was all fake news. It was really the broader circle in the media that just ridiculed us and smeared us through guilt by association.
Where do we get your book, Varsity Blues, The Scandal Within a Scandal?
It's available on any online retailer out there. As Amazon.com is the easiest one to find it. And I think it's important for the audience to know that all the proceeds from the book are going to charity, including a nonprofit that'll help support people who've been falsely accused. This is not about us. This is about getting the truth out there and getting our story out there. Because if it can happen to someone like me, this can happen to other people too. And that ought
Sure.
to frighten every honest American.
So, is there a way that we can keep track of this, check in with you, and see how your lawsuit against Netflix is
Yes,
progressing?
there's also a website called the Scandal Within the Scandal.com that we keep updates on with our lawsuits against Netflix and against USC. We're also suing USC for defrauding us because we met with the school, we met with the development people, as well as the head coach. We verified our donations with Goldman Sachs, our tax people. We got a receipt. And then at my trial, they said none of this was legal. I said, what? That was just shocking. So if you take what they said at trial as the truth under oath, then they defrauded us back when we made our donation.
Yeah.
So we're filing a suit.
So they weren't helpful in your defense at the trial.
Oh, just the opposite. The schools here were denying any of this ever happened. They denied they ever gave a donor family a boost in admissions. They denied this up and down.
Well, and you don't challenge that. Your son would have gotten in on his own merit if what you've
Yeah,
said
it was a
is
tiebreaker
true.
boost. My son had a 93 percentile on his ACT. He had a 3.8 GPA as measured by out of 4 as measured by USC, and he was a national champion water polo player. He was a walk-on candidate. They said, and we met with the coach and with the admissions people. They said, yeah, we would give a tiebreaker boost to any major donor family. It wasn't we had an unqualified child like the other people who were cheating and faking. We had a highly qualified child. My daughters, it's hard to be better than a perfect score. To put that perfect score into perspective, only 4,900 students out of 1.8 million get a perfect score, right? So a perfect score is pretty hard to beat. It's hard to say that they were unqualified. And yet that's exactly what the prosecutors told the media. And what the jury didn't get to see was their perfect score. And so my trial didn't allow any of my evidence in. And so it's just been a miscarriage of justice at every level.
Well, I'm not happy to hear about Judge Gorton's uh, deciding his own rules, and I'm not happy to hear about uh, ambitious prosecutors clawing their way to the top at your expense. My heart goes out to your wife, Leslie, and to your children. And it's really hard to be philosophical about this. I've sat here, and when I read about your story and I've listened to you, I keep trying to think, what is the lesson to be learned here? What can we glean from this? And John, I got to tell you, I'm coming up empty. Other than sometimes life's just not fair, and it seems like you've discovered that in a very real and unfair way. And all I can do is say I'm sorry for you and your family, and I hope smoother, brighter days ahead. And I'm sure there will be.
Yeah, and we're going to continue to fight. I appreciate your comments, John. I think for us and for our point of view, the decision that Leslie and I made to fight this was not an easy one. We had the offer all the time throughout this process to take a plea deal, to save millions of dollars of legal fees, and to move on with our lives.
Yeah.
But for us, that would have tainted our children forever with a scarlet letter that they were unqualified if I falsely confessed to a crime I didn't commit. And so we couldn't do that to our children. And so we would rather fight for the truth and spend our entire life savings defending their honor, because in our minds, I think their honor and their future integrity is worth far more than money. And so while
the only thing I
been
didn't ask
devastating,
is
we
who were the prosecutors that railroaded you?
yeah, I don't want to name names there either.
Come
We're already
on,
in
John.
the crosshairs.
I'm going to go look it up, and I'm going to put it on the
You
truth.
can look it up. Your audience can look it up if they're interested in this. But it's been devastating. In
They
every
shouldn't.
sense, and
They
they've
shouldn't
been
benefit
extreme.
from this. And there isn't a client in the world that should go to them for representation. And if they're in Massachusetts, the bar should take a really close look at them. That's what I think. As you know, the bar used to be a organization of the highest legal and ethical standards. And just like everything else in this country, it seems like they too have become politicized. And whether you're liberal, Democrat, or a conservative Republican seems to make a difference in the way that they hand out discipline
They've been
in the bar.
vindictive. They've been vindictive and aggressive from the original putting me in prison to charging me with 11 felonies.
That's just
They did
so
things
wrong.
throughout this process. I'll tell you one other thing they did, just another example of how vicious they can be, is they took all of my emails. They exceeded the scope of the search warrant. They took 11 years of emails, including all of our personal emails, which included family photos of my children. My twin daughters as 12-year-olds in bathing suits from vacations. My son as a 12-year-old in a bathing suit from family vacations. They shared that with 250 lawyers. We tried to get the judge to take that down from the shared website. They refused.
That's
And
just
so
so
just think about
invasive.
how sick that is. How,
That is
you
just,
know,
this is
this
third
type of,
world country stuff. This
they
is
did that
third
to
world
us.
country stuff. It's making me really
It's creepy.
frustrated
It's
and
creepy.
angry.
My
And
poor wife was angry. Yeah.
yeah, well, look, we wish you the best. God closes a door and he opens a window. I don't know what his plan is for you, but I do believe in God. I do believe in optimism. And I think that there will be smoother and better days ahead for you and your family. Maybe your job is just to expose the evilness. And I think you've done
I
a
think it's a big
phenomenal
part of
job
what
of
we're
doing
doing
that
here.
today. All
Yeah, I
right.
think if we can help any other family from experiencing this nightmare, it'd be an effort well worth it.
Absolutely. Well, Godspeed, good wishes, and keep us informed. We'll continue to follow your journey with interest.
All right. Thank you too.